This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention again, please? Thank you. I know many of us are still completing our indoor picnic, and in this weather, I'm glad we are indoors. But I will make a start, and as promised, we'll welcome you again to the 6th Annual Sheth Lecture. This yearly event, which explores the topic of creativity in later life, is made possible by a very generous gift from Madhu and Jagdish Sheth. And Madhu Sheth is here with us today, and if you will, I'll ask you to stand so that we can all thank you for your generous gift. I want the Sheths to know that this event is eagerly anticipated in the calendar of the Emeritus College, and we are very grateful for the generosity of this gift. My appreciation also goes out to the Emory Alumni Association for their co-sponsorship, and most especially to the staff of the Emeritus College, Charity Crabtree and Monica Ali. I'm going to, if you would stand so we can thank you for all the email and for the very important part that they played in making this luncheon and the lecture possible. The presentation today will include remarks by our guest, a poetry reading, a question and answer period as time allows, and a book signing. Who better to speak to us about creativity than Emory professor and Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, Natasha Trethewey. A daughter of the South, Professor Trethewey was born in Gulfport, Mississippi, and received her BA in English from the University of Georgia, an MA in English and Creative Writing from Hollins University in Virginia, and an MFA in poetry from the University of Massachusetts. Professor Trethewey's work has received wide acclaim in recent years, appearing in literary journals and as anthologies. Her first collection of poetry, Domestic Work, published in 2000, was selected by former United States Poet Laureate Rita Dove as the winner of the inaugural Cave Canem Poetry Prize for the best first book by an African-American poet, and won both the 2001 Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Book Prize and the 2001 Lillian Smith Award for Poetry. Her most recent collection, entitled Native Guard, won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Professor Trethewey's honors, and I will tell you just a few of the myriad, include the Bunting Fellowship from Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation. It is my honor to introduce to you the Phyllis Wheatley Distinguished Professor of English and Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, our own Natasha Trethewey.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I have to say that as I look out there today, I feel both honored and a little nervous, simply because I see among you so many students, colleagues, and friends, which says to me that a lot of you have seen this dog and pony show before. But we can trot it out another time, one more time. I am going to talk today about writing Native Guard and read from Native Guard, and if time permits, I will read to you a few new poems from a new book that I'm working on. I call this talk today Native Guard on Memory, Civil War History, and My South. E.O. Wilson has written, Homo sapiens is the only species to suffer psychological exile. I think about that a lot, particularly in relation to all the panels I've been on at conferences on contemporary Southern literature or Southern poetry. I began to notice after several of these panels that someone almost always raised the question about the psyches of Southern writers, why we write the way that we do. It seemed to me that just as often someone on the panel would answer that question by saying something like, we Southerners write the way that we do because, after all, we lost the war. Each time I've heard this, I've had to say, my South didn't lose the war. On each of these occasions, the other panelists, most likely unintentionally, had responded to the question in a manner that seemed to suggest they had forgotten I was there, and that seemed to speak of the Southern psyche and the Southern experience as if it were monolithic. In a sense, their responses echo a type of erasure that has affected the documenting of public history, the dedication of public monuments, and has continued to affect our public memory. I'm sure my fellow panelists never meant to exclude me when they said we. I am a Southerner too, but these occurrences are evidence of the public memory of the war and its aftermath that still makes outsiders of African Americans, even as almost 200,000 fought for their freedom in the Civil War, and leaves out many narratives which would give us a fuller, richer understanding of American experience. In my most recent collection, Native Guard, the restoration of narratives that have been forgotten, left out of our public memory, undergirded my writing and research. Indeed, the title comes from the name of the first officially sanctioned regiment of African American soldiers in the Civil War, the Louisiana Native Guards, mustered into service in September, October, and November of 1862, the 2nd Regiment stationed just off the coast of my hometown, Gulfport, Mississippi. During the war, they manned the fort on Ship Island as a prison for Confederate soldiers. Visitors to the fort today will see first the plaque placed at the entrance by the Daughters of the Confederacy, listing the names of the Confederate men once interred there. Nowhere is a similar plaque memorializing the names of the Native Guards. And if tourists don't know to ask about the history of these black soldiers, most likely the park ranger will overlook this aspect of the fort's history in his tour, mentioning only that this was a fort taken over by Union forces and that Confederate prisoners were kept there. There is next to no mention that the troops stationed on the island were black. Their story has been erased from the landscape and from our public memory as well. Even now, monuments all around the South serve to inscribe a particular narrative onto the landscape, while at the same time subjugating or erasing others. Thus, part of this collection is an attempt to reinscribe a narrative of those forgotten soldiers into our cultural memory, to create a monument in words to this aspect of our forgotten American history. The power of recording, of documenting, is particularly important to me, a daughter of Mississippi. Like the Native Guards and the Confederate soldiers who would return to a version of home unlike what they'd left behind before the war, I am a kind of exile, a native Mississippian, half white, half black, born to a marriage which was not recognized by the state, thus making me, by extension, illegitimate. When I was born there in 1966, miscegenation was still illegal, and Mississippi would not fully begin to comply with the 1964 Civil Rights Act until much later, and not until much later was the anti-miscegenation law struck from the books. Perhaps because of this, the clerk who filled out my birth certificate listed the race of my white father as Canadian. Thus, my beginnings were documented by someone who skirted the truth, for whatever reasons, and something was left out of the public record of my birth. Likewise, when the plaque was mounted at Ship Island, the Daughters of the Confederacy were creators of that public memory, leaving out the other population on the island. C. Van Woodward, in his preface to Jumpin' Jim Crow, Southern Politics from Civil War to Civil Rights, asserts that during the last 2 decades of the 19th century and the first 2 of the 20th, it was white ladies who bore primary responsibility for the myths glorifying the old order, the lost cause, and white supremacy. Woodward is referring specifically to the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Daughters of the American Revolution, Daughters of Pilgrims, and Daughters of Colonial Governors. They were considered guardians of the past. Non-daughters, he writes, were excluded. In positioning myself as a native daughter, a native guard of Mississippi's past, I wanted to explore the rift between public and personal memory to which I am a legacy, and to grapple with the themes of home and exile, memory and history, which occupy the forefront of the landscape of my imagination. Historian Michael Vurenberg has written, "A better, more humane civilization can be forged in the smithy of painful memory. In restoring to the memory of the Civil War the savagery, heartlessness, and racism of that era, we can allow for the possibility of a civilization based on justice rather than amnesia. It is that amnesia, that forgetting, which I attempt to redress in my work, to bring to light stories that are part of my own or someone else's personal history, but that nonetheless, in the aggregate of what it is to be American, belong to us all." Finally, there is another aspect of history I needed to inscribe with this collection. If this history is the spine of the book, the elegies to my mother are its heart. I'm going to begin reading now from the first section of the book, a monument in words, elegies to my mother, and then a few poems from the middle and final sections that stand as monument to my own relationship to the landscape and history of my South, as well as my place in it. Some of you might recall the Southern Crescent, the name of an old train, part of its route between Atlanta and New Orleans. The Southern Crescent. In 1959, my mother is boarding a train. She is barely 16, her one large grip bulging with homemade dresses, whisper of crinoline and lace, her name stitched inside each one. She is leaving behind the dirt roads of Mississippi, the film of red dust around her ankles, the thin whistle of wind through the floorboards of the shotgun house, the very idea of home. Ahead of her, days of travel, one town after the next, and California, a word she can't stop repeating. Over and over, she will practice meeting her father, imagine how he must look, how different now from the one photo she has of him. She will look at it once more, pulling into the station at Los Angeles, and then again and again on the platform, no one like him in sight. The year the old Crescent makes its last run, my mother insists we ride it together. We leave Gulfport late morning heading east. Years before, we rode together to meet another man, my father, waiting for us as our train derailed. I don't recall how she must have held me, how her face sank as she realized again the uncertainty of it all. That trip, too, gone wrong. Today, she is sure we can leave home, bound only for whatever awaits us. The sun now setting behind us, the rails humming like anticipation, the train pulling us toward the end of another day. I watch each small town pass before my window until the light goes and the reflection of my mother's face appears clearer now as evening comes on, dark and certain. This next poem has an epigraph from Robert Herrick that reads, "Fair daffodils we weep to see, you haste away so soon." Genus Narcissus. The road I walked home from school was dense with trees and shadow, creekside and lit by yellow daffodils, early blossoms bright against winter's last gray days. I must have known they grew wild, thought no harm in taking them. So I did, gathering up as many as I could hold, then presenting them in a jar to my mother. She put them on the sill, and I sat nearby, watching light bend through the glass, day easing into evening, proud of myself for giving my mother some small thing. Childish vanity. I must have seen in them some measure of myself, the slender stems, each blossom a head lifted up toward praise, or bowed to meet its reflection. Walking home those years ago, I knew nothing of Narcissus or the daffodil's short spring, how they dry like graveside flowers, rustling when the wind blew, a whisper treacherous from the sill. Be taken with yourself, they said to me. Die early, to my mother. Graveyard Blues. It rained the whole time we were laying her down, rained from church to grave when we put her down. The suck of mud at our feet was a hollow sound. When the preacher called out, I held up my hand. When he called for a witness, I raised my hand. Death stops the body's work, the soul's a journeyman. The sun came out when I turned to walk away, glared down on me as I turned and walked away, my back to my mother, leaving her where she lay. The road going home was pocked with holes, that home-going road's always full of holes. Though we slow down, time's wheel still rolls. I wander now among names of the dead, my mother's name, stone pillow for my head. This poem relies a bit on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And one of the things that I try to do in this poem is to capture the experience that Orpheus must have had turning around and finding Eurydice gone. It's very much like the kinds of dreams that I have about my mother. If you've lost someone, you might have such dreams. There are two kinds. In one, I'm aware that she's gone, and the dream feels like a lovely visitation, and I'm always happy when I wake up from that dream. But then the other kind of dream is one in which I don't know that she's gone, and that nothing has ever happened, and it always takes a half a second after waking up and turning over and opening my eyes that I realize that she's gone, and the grief is fresh again. Myth. I was asleep while you were dying. It's as if you slipped through some rift, a hollow I make between my slumber and my waking, the Erebus I keep you in, still trying not to let go. You'll be dead again tomorrow, but in dreams you live, so I try taking you back into morning. Sleep heavy, turning my eyes open, I find you do not follow. Again and again this constant forsaking. Again and again this constant forsaking. My eyes open, I find you do not follow. You back into morning, sleep heavy, turning. But in dreams you live, so I try taking, not to let go. You'll be dead again tomorrow. The Erebus I keep you in, still trying, I make between my slumber and my waking. It's as if you slipped through some rift, a hollow. I was asleep while you were dying. I'm going to read now a bit from the title poem of the collection, Native Guard. And one thing I'd like to say before reading it is that in terms of my own creativity, I often, in order to be filled up, in order to be ready if the muse does decide to grace me with her presence, I do a lot of research. I read pretty widely so that there's always something outside of me that I am considering. But of course, those things that I tend to look into are in their own way always showing me back inside myself to the thing that has been the true obsession. The poet Mark Doty says, our metaphors go on ahead of us. So when I began writing Native Guard, it was those soldiers that I talked about at the beginning that I was interested in, this erasure of public history. And I wanted to tell this story of what had been forgotten, to tell a story and to erect a lyrical monument to people who had been forgotten. It didn't occur to me until I got to the writing of the poem Graveyard Blues that I read to you that there was another story that had been forgotten or had not been memorialized in the right way. I had, after so many years, never put a grave marker, a monument on my mother's grave. And so she was just like those soldiers, buried and in some ways not properly memorialized. But it was not until doing this research, all this time later about these soldiers did I realize that there was something else that was really driving me. So this is where it began. There's an epigraph from Frederick Douglass that reads, "If this war is to be forgotten, I ask in the name of all things sacred, what shall men remember?" One last thing I'll say is that even as this particular soldier is imagined, all of the battles and other skirmishes and other historical details that the poem mentions are all factual. And in fact, the major that I mentioned, who was stationed on the island, Major Dumas, was a free person of color in Louisiana who was quadroon or octoroon. His father was a white planter, his mother a mulatto. And when his father died, he inherited the plantation and the slaves. And because it was illegal to manumit slaves in New Orleans, in Louisiana at the time, he kept them, though he never liked having them. And when the Union was enlisting black soldiers, he joined and freed his slaves and encouraged those men of age to join the Native Guards. The Native Guard, whose voice you'll hear now, was, in my imaginings, one of his servants, perhaps the servant who would have accompanied him to France. Many young men in Major Dumas's position were educated in Europe. He would have been a manservant and learned to read and write because of that. Native Guard, November 1862. Truth be told, I do not want to forget anything of my former life, the landscape song of bondage, dirge in the river's throat where it churns into the gulf, wind in trees choked with vines. I thought to carry with me want of freedom, though I had been freed, remembrance, not constant recollection. Yes, I was born a slave at harvest time in the parish of Ascension. I've reached 33 with history of one younger inscribed upon my back. I now use ink to keep record, a closed book, not the lore of memory, flawed, changeful, that dulls the lash for the master, sharpens it for the slave. December 1862. For the slave, having a master sharpens the bend into work, the way the sergeant moves us now to perfect battalion drill, dress parade. Still, we're called supply units, not infantry, and so we dig trenches, haul burdens for the army no less heavy than before. I heard the colonel call it nigger work. Half rations make our work familiar still. We take those things we need from the Confederates' abandoned homes, salt, sugar, even this journal, near full with someone else's words, overlapped now, cross-hatched beneath mine, on every page, his story intersecting with my own. January 1863. Oh, how history intersects, my own birth upon a ship called the Northern Star, and I'm delivered into a new life. Fort Massachusetts, a great irony, both path and destination of freedom I'd not dared to travel. Here, now, I walk, ankle deep in sand, fly-bitten, nearly smothered by heat, and yet I can look out upon the Gulf and see the surf breaking, tossing the ships, the great gunboats bobbing on the water. And are we not the same, slaves in the hands of the master, destiny, night sky red with the promise of fortune, dawn pink as new flesh, healing, unfettered. January 1863. Today, dawn read as warning, unfettered supplies stacked on the beach at our landing, washed away in the storm that rose too fast, caught us unprepared. Later, as we worked, I joined in the low singing someone raised to pace us and felt a bond in labor I had not known. It was then a dark man removed his shirt, revealed the scars cross-hatched like the lines in this journal on his back. It was he who remarked at how the ropes cracked like whips on the sand, made us take note of the wild dance of a tent loosed by wind. We watched and learned. Like any shrewd master, we know now to tie down what we will keep. February 1863. We know it is our duty now to keep white men as prisoners, rebel soldiers, would-be masters. We're all bondsmen here, each to the other. Freedom has gotten them captivity, for us a conscription we have chosen, jailers to those who still would have us slaves. They are cautious, dreading the sight of us. Some neither read nor write, are laid too low and have few words to send, but those I give them. Still, they are wary of a Negro writing, taking down letters. X binds them to the page, a mute symbol like the cross on a grave. I suspect they fear I'll listen, put something else down in ink. March 1863. I listen, put down in ink what I know they labor to say between silences too big for words, worry for beloveds. My dearest, how are you getting along? What has become of their small plots of land? Did you harvest enough food to put by? They long for the comfort of former lives. I see you as you were, waving goodbye. Some send photographs, a likeness in case the body can't return. Others dictate harsh facts of this war. The hot air carries the stench of limbs rotten in the bone pit. Flies swarm, a black cloud. We hunger, grow weak. When men die, we eat their share of hardtack. April 1863. When men die, we eat their share of hardtack, trying not to recall their hollow sockets, the worm stitch of their cheeks. Today we buried the last of our dead from Pascagoula and those who died retreating to our ship, white sailors in blue firing upon us as if we were the enemy. I'd thought the fighting over, then watched a man fall beside me, knees first as in prayer, then another, his arms outstretched as if borne upon the cross. Smoke that rose from each gun seemed a soul departing. The colonel said, an unfortunate incident, said, their name shall deck the page of history. June 1863. Some name shall deck the page of history as it is written on stone. Some will not. Yesterday, word came of colored troops dead on the battlefield at Port Hudson, how General Banks was heard to say, I have no dead there, and left them unclaimed. Last night I dreamt their eyes still open, dim, clouded as the eyes of fish washed ashore, yet fixed, staring back at me. Still more come today, eager to enlist. Their bodies, haggard faces, gaunt limbs bring news of the mainland. Starved, they suffer like our prisoners. Dying, they plead for what we do not have to give. Death makes equals of us all, a fair master. August 1864. Dumas was a fair master to us all. He taught me to read and write. I was a man servant, if not a man. At my work, I studied natural things, all manner of plants, birds I draw now in my book, wren, willet, egret, loon. Tending the gardens, I thought only to study live things, thought never to know so much about the dead. Now I tend Ship Island graves, mounds like dunes that shift and disappear. I record names, send home simple notes, not much more than how and when, an official duty. I'm told it's best to spare most detail, but I know there are things which must be accounted for. 1865. These are things which must be accounted for. Slaughter under the white flag of surrender, black massacre at Fort Pillow, our new name, the Corps d'Afrique, words that take the native from our claim, mossbacks and freedmen, exiles in their own homeland, the disease, the maimed, every lost limb and what remains, phantom ache, memory haunting an empty sleeve, the hog eaten at Gettysburg, unmarked in their graves, all the dead letters unanswered, untold stories of those that time will render mute. Beneath battlefields, green again, the dead molder, a scaffolding of bone we tread upon, forgetting, truth be told. (1961), the year Barack Obama was born, 21 states still had anti-miscegenation laws on the books. I was born just 5 years later in the state of Mississippi. Only about 11 years ago did the state of Alabama vote to remove the anti-miscegenation law from the books. They got rid of it. 40-some% of the population, however, wanted to keep it, so that at least symbolically, it could be said that parents like mine couldn't be married legally and people like me born legally in the state. Miscegenation. In 1965, my parents broke 2 laws of Mississippi. They went to Ohio to marry, returned to Mississippi. They crossed the river into Cincinnati, a city whose name begins with a sound like sin, the sound of wrong, miss in Mississippi. A year later, they moved to Canada, followed a route the same as slaves, the train slicing the white glaze of winter, leaving Mississippi. Faulkner's Joe Christmas was born in winter, like Jesus, given his name for the day he was left at the orphanage, his race unknown in Mississippi. My father was reading War and Peace when he gave me my name. I was born near Easter, 1966, in Mississippi. When I turned 33, my father said, "It's your Jesus year. You're the same age he was when he died." It was spring, the hills green in Mississippi. I know more than Joe Christmas did. Natasha is a Russian name, though I'm not. It means Christmas child, even in Mississippi. My mother dreams another country. Already the words are changing. She is changing from colored to Negro, black still years ahead. This is 1966. She is married to a white man, and there are more names for what grows inside her. It is enough to worry about words like mongrel and the infertility of mules and mulattoes while flipping through a book of baby names. She has come home to wait out the long months, her room unchanged since she's been gone, dolls winking down from every shelf, all of them white. Every day she is flanked by the rituals of superstition, and there is a name she will learn for this too, maternal impression, the shape like an unknown country marking the back of the newborn's thigh. For now, women tell her to clear her head, to steady her hands, or she'll gray a lock of the child's hair wherever she worries her own, imprint somewhere the outline of a thing she craves too much. They tell her to stanch her cravings by eating dirt. All spring she has sat on her hands, her fingers numb. For a while each day she can't feel anything she touches, the arbor out back, the landscape's green tangle, the molehill of her own swelling. Here, outside the city limits, cars speed by, clouds of red dust in their wake. She breathes it in, Mississippi, then drifts toward sleep, thinking of some place she's never been. Late, Mississippi is a dark backdrop bearing down on the windows of her room. On the TV in the corner, the station signs off, broadcasting its nightly salutation, the waving stars and stripes, our national anthem. Southern Gothic. I have lain down into 1970, into the bed my parents will share for only a few more years. Early evening, they have not yet turned from each other in sleep, their bodies curved, parentheses framing the separate lives they'll wake to. Dreaming, I am again the child with too many questions, the endless why and why and why. My mother cannot answer, her mouth closed, a gesture toward her future, cold lips stitched shut. The lines in my young father's face deepen toward an expression of grief. I have come home from the schoolyard with the words that shadow us in this small southern town. Peckerwood and nigger lover, half-breed and zebra, words that take shape outside us. We're huddled on the tiny island of bed, quiet in the language of blood, the house unsteady on its cinder block haunches, sinking deeper into the muck of ancestry. Oil lamps flicker around us, our shadows, dark glyphs on the wall, bigger and stranger than we are. Incident. We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened, the charred grass now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross, trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil. It seemed the angels had gathered, white men in their gowns, When they were done, they left quietly. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. When they were done, the men left quietly. No one came. Nothing really happened. By morning, all the flames had dimmed. We tell the story every year. I'm going to close with 3 poems now. This is Monument. Today the ants are busy beside my front steps, weaving in and out of the hill they're building. I watch them emerge and, like everything I've forgotten, disappear into the subterranean, a world made by displacement. In the cemetery last June, I circled, lost, weeds and grass grown up all around, the landscape blurred and waving. At my mother's grave, ants streamed in and out like arteries, a tiny hill rising above her untended plot. Bit by bit, red dirt piled up, spread like a rash on the grass. I watched a long time the ants' determined work, how they brought up soil of which she will be part, and piled it before me. Believe me when I say I've tried not to begrudge them their industry, this reminder of what I haven't done. Even now, the mound is a blister on my heart, a red and humming swarm. This poem has an epigraph from Allen Tate's Ode to the Confederate Dead that reads, "Now that the salt of their blood stiffens the saltier oblivion of the sea." Elegy for the Native Guards. We leave Gulfport at noon, gulls overhead trailing the boat, streamers, noisy fanfare all the way to Ship Island. What we see first is the fort, its roof of grass a lee, half reminder of the men who served there, a weathered monument to some of the dead. Inside we follow the ranger, hurried though we are to get to the beach. He tells of graves lost in the Gulf, the island split in half when Hurricane Camille hit, shows us casemates, cannons, the store that sells souvenirs, tokens of history long buried. The Daughters of the Confederacy has placed a plaque here at the fort's entrance, each Confederate soldier's name raised hard in bronze, no names carved for the Native Guards, 2nd Regiment, Union men, black phalanx. What is monument to their legacy? All the grave markers, all the crude headstones, water lost. Now fish dart among their bones, and we listen for what the waves intone. Only the fort remains, near 40 feet high, round, unfinished, half open to the sky, the elements, wind, rain, God's deliberate eye. And this last poem has an epigraph from E.O. Wilson that reads, "Homo sapiens is the only species to suffer psychological exile." South. I returned to a stand of pines, bone-thin phalanx flanking the roadside, tangle of understory, a dialectic of dark and light, and magnolias blossoming like afterthought, each flower a surrender, white flags draped among the branches. I returned to Land's End, the swath of coast clear-cut and buried in sand, mangrove, live oak, gulfweed, raised and replaced by thin palms, palmettos, symbols of victory or defiance, over and over, marking this vanquished land. I returned to a field of cotton, hallowed ground as slave legend goes, each bowl holding the ghosts of generations, those who measured their days by the heft of sacks and links of rows, whose sweat flecked the cotton plants still sewn into our clothes. I returned to a country battlefield where colored troops fought and died, Port Hudson where their bodies swelled and blackened beneath the sun, unburied until Earth's green sheet pulled over them, unmarked by any headstones. Where the roads, buildings, and monuments are named to honor the Confederacy, where that old flag still hangs, I return to Mississippi, state that made a crime of me. Mulatto, half-breed, native, in my native land, this place, they'll bury me. Thank you.
I think the only word is thank you, or words. Professor Trethewey has said that she will take a few questions, and I think we could probably have maybe 10 minutes for questions. There is a microphone that we can take to you, if that would help so that everyone can hear. Do we have questions?
Yes.
Thank you, first of all. Tell us, what do you think the role of poetry is in these very difficult times we live in?
To answer that, I have to go to some great old poets. Percy Bysshe Shelley. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. I do feel that it's my duty to inscribe the cultural memory of a people and a time, to legislate in that way. And also Keats, to sharpen one's vision into the heart and nature of man. And William Carlos Williams. You can't get the news from poetry, but men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. So those are my answers. Yep. Yes.
I just returned yesterday from a trip to Cincinnati, as a matter of fact. And a friend I was visiting there told me about the Museum of the Underground Railway.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have a chance this weekend to visit it, but she said there was a great deal of controversy about building it.
Mm-hmm.
That there were those who said this is an awful time, it's a blight, we shouldn't try to memorialize it, it's too painful. Your work on memory, the theme of memory is what struck me, so I just wonder if you would comment on that controversy.
You know, I have a couple of thoughts about that. I mean, first, you know, certainly this country has seen no end to dark times. But the triumph of the human spirit in the darkest of times is, I think, one of the most powerful and beautiful things that we have. One of the greatest gifts that we have to humanity is to show those things. So I'm saddened when folks would rather bury things and forget them. I think forgetting is a real dangerous thing. And I think we can all think of times when forgetting is going to lead us down a path of repeating certain kinds of things. But it reminds me of the controversy surrounding the lynching exhibit Without Sanctuary a few years ago. Emory was part of it, the exhibit at the King Center. I think I had to stop reading the editorial page of the AJC for a while because of things I saw there. But one of the things I remember is that there were good things too. I remember someone identifying herself in the letter as a young white woman who did not know this history and was so glad that it was being told because it was a shared history. It belongs to her as much as it belongs to, the victims and their generations. But there were also people who said this is a history better left, forgotten and buried. Why should we open these old wounds? Now, to believe that by telling our fuller versions of our history as Americans is opening old wounds suggests that you believe the wound had healed as opposed to festering for all these years. That is why I'm so proud in Mississippi, for example, that they have launched a truth commission, because I think that telling the truth, across time and space, across gender and racial and economic lines, is the only way to actually heal the wounds of the past, as opposed to letting them continue to fester. Go ahead, Enrico.
Just since 9/11, since the economic times, and a lot of my friends, when they go through things, a lot of times they want to use creative expression to get things out, but they just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it's really difficult for me to try to explain it to them. So do you have any thoughts on how a person can get in touch with their creative side?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the tragedy of 9/11, because I think that they figured out that the blossoming of poetry after that was probably the greatest, that we'd had. The more people turned to poetry after that to try to make sense of, in language, what seemed to be the unspeakable. Of course, not all of it was good. Probably most of it was pretty bad. But I think it did allow people to feel that there was an outlet, that language was the only thing that could attend to the grief that they felt after that. I think it can be difficult to deal with such difficult subject matter, but while also attending to the integrity of a poem as art, as a made thing, rather than the poem simply as one's journal entry. It's been really hard for me. When I turned in Native Guard in March of 2005, it had been exactly 20 years since my mother's death. It took me that long to write poems that I felt lived up to at least my own standards for what a poem has to be and do. And I think that for me, turning toward other things, turning toward history, reading widely is a way for me to move out of my own grief and not focus so much on my own navel, so that I can look out at the world and see myself within the continuum of history. I think that's a way for any of us to write better about those things that are so difficult for us that we're seeking an outlet for. So not to give up those obsessions, but to find other things through which to articulate them. Delving into histories that speak to you, but also help answer that kind of grief. I mean, when I wrote my second collection, Belloc Ophelia, in many ways, there was a lot of me in that book, but I couldn't have written sort of, those poems about being mixed race, feeling like I was looked at, growing up a lot in Mississippi. So instead, I find a character who's looked at because of her job and who feels what I feel, but in a very different setting. And it allows a kind of distance that the mask of poetry gives. I also think that form is another way to do it, to set for yourself the requirements of certain form. Because if I didn't put the envelope of form around some of my subject matter, it would get unwieldy. And it's only because of that elegant envelope that I'm able to, keep a handle on what is, potentially, overly dramatic or sentimental or sensational. I think form and, history, things outside of ourselves. I know this lady has a question, and then, sir.
You've answered so much of it, and I wondered, I think what you said sort of talks about the difference between therapy and writing poetry, because the form and the reading history would give you that outward thing, but poets still deal with the inward and let the rest of us deal with our inward. As you write. So thank you very much. And I was thinking last night there was the first of the series on the Indians, the American Indians, and it was so different from the history I grew up with,
Right.
and the rest of you, up,
Right.
which glorified the white, black was mostly Uncle Tom,
Yeah.
and the happiness, and that was all.
Right.
And certainly the Indians and there's so much that's missing in history.
That's right.
But thank you for reaching my insides, and I'm sure everyone else's.
Well,
And
thank you.
It's wonderful to hear you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, that is right. I mean, it's not to say that writing a poem can't be therapeutic or feel that way for the writer, but for it to mean something to the reader or the listener, we have to look beyond ourselves and find a way that allows you to enter into that sort of emotional state that's being described. So, and, I think that we're all going to be served by the telling of these fuller versions of our history as Americans. I mean, all of it is a shared history. I feel deprived of things I don't know. Yes.
I would like to switch for a moment to another war. I'd like to switch to another war that took place 100 years or so later, the World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Your poetry today reminds me of an experience that I had in a hospital bed
Mm-hmm.
in World War II with a gentleman of color, also from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Why am I doing this?" Poetry to me is the questions that are raised and the answers that are sometimes so elusive.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Why am I doing this? Why am I here?" He was very severely wounded. And questioning his presence there, why when I go back to Chicago, if I'm able to go back, I'll experience the same things which I've always experienced.
Yeah.
And being from Chicago myself, I knew right away what he was talking about. There was the black and white dichotomy in Chicago, and I knew what he was saying, and the poetry of what he was saying
Mm-hmm.
taught me a great lesson. Why was he doing it, I asked myself, and I didn't really know until I got back home after the war and traveled in the South, where I went to school, and saw the drinking fountains and the outside toilets and the signs in the restaurants, all the things that he had been referring to that I didn't fully realize what impact it was.
Yeah.
So the poetry is beautiful, and the way you've expressed it, particularly in terms of the questions that are raised and the very elusive answers that are always there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for telling us that story. It's a really good story because, I think that one of the things that I have tried to deal with in Native Guard, by claiming my South, claiming my Mississippi, a place that has, in so many ways, is reminding me that I'm an outsider. When we had our flag controversy here in Georgia, again, I had to stop reading the AJC because somebody wrote in and said, all true Southerners love that flag. And I'm just told yet again, so I'm not a true Southerner. There's ways over and over that we're told that this is not ours too. But if this isn't mine, I don't have anything else. So I can imagine that, for that soldier, as bad as things were going to be, this is his country too. And, some people might be mad at me for saying this, but I'm going to say it because I understood very well. When Michelle Obama said, and she got in big trouble, it's the first time I've ever been proud of my country. Well, you know what? There's nothing wrong with criticizing your country. I mean, I am patriotic. I mean, I even hate using that word because it always makes us think of one kind of thing. But you can be patriotic and have every reason to hate your country. I have every reason to hate Mississippi, don't you think? Yes. Well, but that doesn't mean it's not mine. So I've been pretty proud of this country too. I've been pretty disappointed with it a lot of times as well. And I think that that's the only sophisticated response. Love and hate. You know, blindly loving this place means you're avoiding a whole lot of this history that you brought up. I mean, knowing it for what it really is and loving it nonetheless means you want to make it better. That is the biggest kind of patriotism that I can imagine. Yes?
Yes, thank you so much. I'd like to know what you're currently researching this far.
Well, the obsessions don't change, just how I go about approaching them. So I got interested in writing about, as part of the book, a spine in some ways, Mexican Costa paintings from the 18th century. I'm very interested in these paintings because they illustrated the mixed blood unions in the colony. And right on each painting, they would have the taxonomies of the people. So, you know, de español y negra, mulata. And so it was that combination of the iconography of the people and the text that, and the taxonomies, the names that we have given across time and space to control people in a society, especially mixed blood people, and to keep people separate. So that's obviously an obsession I have. You can hear it in those other poems, but it's about, so I'm interested in those things in the law, in the language, the language of empire, you know. I'm also interested in the language of science, you know, natural history, natural philosophy, the Enlightenment, and which of course is sort of the beginnings of our ideas of racial difference. Fascinating that it was both the Enlightenment, but also the beginning of, you know, really codifying this kind of racialized thinking of racial difference. So that, but beyond that, you know, it really is again about what's left out. I mean, there's so much to know, so much that gets left out of our textbooks, left out of our histories, left out of the things we say to one another. I'm always trying to find those things and bring them back in. Thanks. One last question. Yeah.
It struck me that you're liberating our language and our thought concepts, our conceptual structure for who we are and our identity, and that you are not merely doing a kind of cognitive therapy, but doing the end stages of the struggle that the Civil War started, which is to redefine and recertify everyone in the United States as American. And how have you dealt with the issue that the very language that you're offered to use as a poet is language that, in one sense, is enslaved to the purposes that created the Civil War?
I find that delicious, actually. When I was finishing up the research on Native Guard, I was hanging out with my OED, as I often do, and reading, you know, the entire entries on a word. And I was looking at the word native, and the first definition that comes up for the word native is not what I expected, not like someone who's a native of Mississippi or a native plant. The first definition was someone born into the condition of servitude. A thrall. And so you're right, we are enthralled to language. And I didn't say this answering your question, but the title of the book is Thrall. And it is very much about the way that we are enthralled to the language we've been given that has named us and shaped our reality, our experience. You know, I find that it's very exciting to be given such a thing to make sense of. In the same way that, you know, writing about Mississippi, you know, I write what I've been given to write, and I can't imagine what I would have done had I not been given that history. So I'm grateful for that, being given that, and I'm grateful for being given this language that has enthralled us for so long. And to be able to sort of use that language to dismantle some of that at the same time is very exciting. Thank you for your question.
I want you to know that there is a book signing in the adjoining room if you want to look at some of the wonderful books that are there, and perhaps if there's time that Natasha Trethewey will sign them. And all I can say is you've sent us out into this beautiful spring afternoon with much lighter hearts. Thank you so much.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.